Hello. How are you? Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Just wanted to
Okay.
clean up the background a bit.
Okay.
I have a new working setup and it's new the railroad, but it's too hot in my my place to close the window. So
Yeah.
if the train noise, I will close the window temporarily. So sorry about that in advance.
Okay. That's fine.
Yeah, it's like here it's 30 degrees Celsius and in my flat it's like 28 degrees at the moment.
Oh. Yeah, it's quite hot then.
Yeah, it's like Ukraine have very interesting climate. We have temperature from -20 to plus like 40. And minus
Okay.
20 in the winter, not every winter,
Yeah.
but one,
Sometimes.
yeah, sometime. Yeah, usually it's like at least -10, -15 every winter, and like plus 40 in the summer. So bunch of different clothes from winter to like summer. There is no like. Yeah, I think we can start with official part, and Jakub will join. But we will save more time for like discussion.
Yeah. Yakov said he will join in like 10-15 minutes. So he should be good.
Okay, because
Yeah.
actually, like I did some thinking about his second topic item. I will send you in a chat. My proposal. It's like solve my issue and also so like troubles that Yakov have with refactoring visitor. Just finish like that comment, and since we'll probably discuss it as possible solution, it would be great if you
Okay.
so meanwhile I will open the notes and agenda, and yeah, today is 29th, first one. Yeah, so I send the link in the chat just in case somebody else will join. So let's start with agenda, and yeah, as usual, you need to sign documents. If you're watching on YouTube, obviously it's too fast and we both sign it. But if you're watching on YouTube and want to join, please feel free. It's very easy. You can add yourself to agenda items, to agenda. One thing you need to sign all the documents in. There is a link in every agenda. It's first agenda item. Just sign them. You can sign them as individual, nothing fancy, just code of conduct and like membership agreement. You can sign it as individual. It's not, don't need to involve your company or anything. So in introduction of attendees, hi, my name is Ivan. Jakov will join in 10 minutes, and you, Sahaj.
Hi, I'm Sahaj. Yeah.
I think last time we actually have like almost full screen, or like one before previous one. So we have like attendance. I think like it's summer, so people, most of the people have vacation.
Yeah, probably.
So plus I just merged like
The CCN stuff.
yeah, CCN
Client
stuff.
control.
Yeah, Yakov. Oh, Alex.
Is the syntax like finalized for CCN, like the multi-dimensional array thing?
Yes, with multi-dimensional array thing. I
Just
like
putting. It's kind of like confusing. You keep putting like exclamation points after single one.
yeah,
Each one you want.
Yeah, but it's only a way to specify where you want like non-nullability assertion
Okay.
inside the array or outside the array. Alex initially wanted to do it without that syntax, and just like say you cannot put non-null assertion inside the arrays, only on array as a whole, but it was deal breaker for some people. Yeah, and I have a train coming up.
Oh.
So yeah, so that's why Alex said that. I don't think anyone particularly like that syntax, but it's the only mechanism we have. Plus, it's future-proof. In future, if we add something else beyond exclamation mark, same with like question mark, you need to be able to specify where you want relaxing on non-nullability inside the array or outside the array. So yeah. So this syntax got in, but it's only syntax and not on the experimental flag, so we can break it like next release, between releases. It's experimental. You get this IST nodes only if you enable like experimental flags. So it's like there is a warning everywhere saying it's experimental. So I merge it and can change it.
Yeah.
It's still stage 1, so technically we merged it as experiment. It's not like even stage 2, meaning like it shape up. It's like Alex wanted to experiment with it, so I added it. Basically, like maybe no background, and we have time to discuss it anyway before Yakov join. Alex, main reason why Alex needed in the core because Yelp use Apollo iOS, and Apollo iOS use GraphQL.js for code generation, and he convinced maintainer of Apollo iOS to actually use this feature, even as experimental. So he needed it to GraphQL.js to like, and he also wanted to contribute something to Guild GraphQL CodeGen. So this like much basically enables him to do that. I need to cut like Alpha 2, I think, with this change. So
okay. What about the foreign stream? Did we like finalize the response or no?
I think it will come. So like I had a proposal of, I don't like this optionality because previous version people just said like, if you specify stream in default, server can ignore it, and it's weird. It's a directive, you specify it, why it's ignored. So I propose with adding incremental to power field, and I think people agreed on that, but we didn't discuss it on main working group yet. I came up with idea during working group, but I don't think like people, we had like a real discussion for it. It looked like everybody agreed, and we are finalizing like stuff finally. And
because I see like Rob has a pull request again for like he made a new one a couple of days ago for stream and defer. Like he recreated his old one, I think.
Yeah, I like okay. I missed that. I'm
3659. It's like 6 days ago. He recreated his like old one, I think.
Okay. I will close previous one. I will pin him asking. Yeah, he closed it himself. Cool. Because he have like commit access. Cool. Let's probably because he have like bunch of stacked pair and 2 previous pairs matched. So now he down to only one PR. So I think he just like did a fresh start on that one. Yeah, but technically I think it's still stage one. So
Okay. I mean, so we can kind of merge this one, so at least people can try on alpha, right?
One we can one thing why we previously didn't want, like two things that we previously didn't want to match. First is that after merge execute will start returning async iteratable, and it's like a
Breaking the change.
And second thing, it's like we discussed that not all servers are ready to serve incremental delivery, but with top level proposal of incremental field, it's actually solve this issue. I think like we can figure out how to do that. Right now, me and Yakov, hi Yakov, by the way, like we're discussing with Sahej, we didn't want to start agenda discussion without you. So we waited, and in meantime, we discussed Rob PR about Rob's PR about streaming defer, and if it's possible to merge it under experimental flag, same as client control nullability. And I was saying like it's possible. The only thing, the big thing about it is like change of return type. But in scope of things that you and me discussing about new API for execute, changes to execute API and putting subscribe in, I think we can figure out some way to make stream defer less breaking and merge stream defer under experimental flag. So it's like separate discussion, and we can either discuss it at the end of this call or like asynchronously. Just wanted to explain what we discussing before we join.
Great. Thank you very much.
So
sorry I was late.
Yeah, no problem. It's like, as you see, it's only the strongest GraphQL believers join during summer vacation period. So you're kind of like one of the elite. Yeah. So let's start with agenda items, and I actually lost agenda. I will open it. So yeah, the first agenda item is instance of, and you added it, Yakov. So like, microphone to you. You're on mute, by the way.
Sorry about that. So basically, I think there were a couple of reasons. The title is a little misleading. The title is like the future of instance of or something like that, or direction of it. But the question, but that sort of gets it backwards. Like, what's wrong with instance of? So I think offline or asynchronously, I'm not sure how much was published. We were discussing. It seems like the most important issue that instance of is connected to is currently the future in terms of whether we're going to be supporting ESM and CommonJS formats going forward, and how it would be possible to have like interoperability between the libraries. I think that's what we, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's what we sort of focused on, and that instance of is kind of a blocker because because then there would be like dual packages. I mean, there'd be two versions potentially of GraphQL, not necessarily. I should say two instances, not necessarily different versions, but two instances. One is in a CHS and the one in ESM, and the instance of checks would fail. So that's basically where I am in terms of the motivation. And then I had a broader PR that was maybe address some other things, and Lauren has a more focused PR to replace the instance of checks for our predicates with symbol checks. And that's sort of summarizing, I think, like the topic. So the topic could maybe be renamed, because we only need to decide whether to move ahead with symbols if we have a thought as to what's going on with ESM and CJS. At least that's my understanding. So I'm not sure whether we want to start the discussion with that in terms of how things are looking. I think if I recall at our last meeting, or maybe it was the 2 times ago, we were thinking of going ahead with ESM only support. And basically, if that's the case, and we got some support, I think from an interested commenter, the author of GraphQL Upload, Jaden. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. You know, he was very pro going ESM only. So if we're going ESM only, there's really not much to worry about, I think. And that's where I am. But if we're trying to support both, then maybe we would want to introduce symbols. That's how I understand the discussion that was held asynchronously up to this point.
Yeah, so to explain my point, it's like one granting issue. And I was in a moment where that I was just starting to contribute, where when Lee added instance of check to a project, like our custom instance of check. And our custom instance of check is problematic. Even after Warren added like a global thing, yeah, it's still problematic. And sorry about that. I expense a hedge. I live near the train tracks, and it's super hot here. So I'm like closing a window when a train comes and open afterwards. So issue that we solving here is that with instance of check is that our API wasn't designed to be like to support multiple instances of GraphQL.js. I would say like there is 2 separate issues, like 3 separate issues. Supporting like non-GraphQL.js version of GraphQL.js interfaces. So custom implementation, which is not like inherited. This is like need a use case, and except like executor, I didn't saw any other project like recreating stuff. And I believe like it should be use case based. So if somebody came up with use case for like third party implementation, we need to either address it in GraphQL.js or say like, yeah, it's valid use case, it can live on its own, and we need to think about like, until now, I didn't solve that. Second thing, support between version. So like, should we allow one instance, like should newer version of GraphQL.js support things created by older version or vice versa? I don't think so. It's like you see this visitor, like right now, the entire migration thing, it's like juggling of stuff, and with supporting between multiple version, we replace both with knives and start juggling with knives, because it's like it's so easy to make mistake. It's so hard to think about like compatibility between different version. Yeah, so for me, we can discuss solution, but I'm like strongly against supporting not the same code base. So if something is created by the same, just a copy of the same source code, I'm okay with it. It doesn't complicate API, migration path is the same, it solves some technical issues. I'm like against on opening food gate and saying we support like everything. So I'm like, if we can, and like Dino thing is separate thing. We slowly move in that direction, and like we need to pass it over finish line. But basically, we cannot tie to version because version is like we release npm branch for people to experiment. We release like canaries. Canaries have like separate version, but we release npm branch, and in Dino ecosystem, people just use whatever is in main or in like certain branches. So I'm like against depending on the version, and the only way forward I see is like git hash, a commit hash. So if solution basically say like this schema created with this hash, and it's passed to execute created with this commit, they're compatible. If it's different commits, they're not compatible. We can, since we do build step anyway, our source code is TypeScript, but we need the build step for like number of reasons. We have like couple of transformation, and we generate version JS and version TS and other stuff. So we need the build step anyway. And during build step, you can inject like git hash in strings, in symbols, anywhere. So like my like, if we tie with compatibility to commit hashes, I'm okay with experimenting and comparing pros and cons. If we go beyond version of third-party implementation, I'm like, it's too much. It's adding too much like problems for for something like to solve like use case that not many people reported. Like I don't think we actually have like any issues asking for third-party implementation of something, or like support between different versions. I think people are pretty more or less okay with like updating GraphQL as per dependency across like the whole thing.
I think that all that is definitely fair. I'm just wondering, meaning, so we basically whittled it down to, our use case right now is the ESM CJS compatibility, right?
Yeah.
So are we I mean, I'm definitely no expert in making sure that those are cross compatible and even in anything really, but I'm just noting that I think we had decided tentatively to go ESM only. So then maybe we don't have a use case at all, but or did we not really for sure decide that?
Yes.
Are we maybe backing away from that? So I mean, that's part of, I think, what Lauren's PR is about. He doesn't want us to back away from that, I think, and he may represent a contingent. I don't know. And then there's the ESM only contingent. So I guess, I mean, I think it's somewhat dependent on that, right?
Yeah, in a sense, idea like when we discuss it, I use flow as example, Flow.js. So for a long time we discussed like what to do with flow typings when we switch to TypeScript, because we like break people consuming GraphQL.js in flow, and it was adding like complexity to the entire migration process. Even like someone from Guild offered like to maintain them, but in reality, what we did, we create an issue asking should we remove it. There was nothing strong for, we went away and remove it, and listen if anybody will scream in pain, basically, like in a sense, like if we break somebody or not. And for Flow, it was great, like a great step, because like nobody, like it looked like nobody cared. I spoke like with Facebook guys, and they agreed that it's necessary step, and they're okay to bite the bullet, like on their side. But other than that, either Flow community is small, or like people migrating from Flow anyway, but we save ourselves not only like initial effort to support Flow typings, but we save ourselves like maintenance of Flow typing. Imagine like every PR would change like both type systems. And I think it's a great example of thinking, being in mentality, we cannot break anybody. I'm like in mentality, we cannot break a lot of people without strong reason, if we can, and we cannot do that without migration paths. So in a sense, my proposal going ESM only is the same thing. And Warren is like community response saying maybe we should add it. So I'm like, I think we probably need to add it, especially if more people will come, or if like we discuss. So I'm like, right now, it's probably okay to add it back, because there is at least somebody says they need it. In case of Flow, nobody said. So basically, it's based on feedback, how popular this issue would be. And I think we can do even more. In a sense, I can probably like pin with his issue and see like if more people will react, and probably have some discussion like how breaking it is. But I'm like feeling probably we will add it. From my attempt to switch with repo to ESM, I discovered like bunch of projects is not ESM ready. Like I cannot switch our repo to ESM only because Docusaurus is not supporting ESM fully. So it's look like my assumption was, I assume it too early, that everybody okay with ESM. What I see, it's like 50 TypeScript and got normal ESM support only in latest version. So maybe we need to add it back. One key thing here is that ESM and MJS itself, it's temporary. At least I view it temporary. I don't want to start with like this double releases of source code for a long time. We waste a bunch of like resources. Like package is bigger, build step is longer. Potentially there is like, you need to maintain and test both like things. So I'm like treated like a temporary. Even if we add CJS, we probably add CJS, but but only for a couple of releases, maybe for a year or two. It's not like long-term thing. So I don't think we should design API around it. That said, our current instance of mechanism is bad. It's bad. I'm like totally agree it's bad. So I'm using Warren PR not as like CJS, MJS specifically, but possibly as possible replacement of instance of check right now.
Okay, that's pretty fair. So, so I think then the only thing to talk about specifically in terms of Lauren's PR and using symbols is the relationship between versions, which you've partially covered with your suggestion that we use git commits. I think what Lauren was pointing out is that we have another option, which is that we can say that we only support the same versions, but we can stop checking for them. Meaning package managers, usually take take the center stage in making sure that all the all the packages are managed, and so we can say that any errors are not really our responsibility, and that you can use the same, even for example ESM and CJS, you have to use the same version, and it's on you to make sure that you're doing that. So I think that's what I think when Lee added the actually I'm not sure about that, but you can maybe tell me. But when this instance of check was originally introduced to check to help also check versions, I think that was around the time that the library switched to being a peer dependency, and it was very important to make sure, in terms of the overall ecosystem, that people were using it that way. But now it's been some time since then, so maybe just to keep our lives simpler, we can just rely on people using their package managers and bundlers, correctly, and only support the same version, but not actually check for it.
Yeah, I can provide a little bit context about that. So back when Lee added it, he added it not like a preventive measure for some future problem. I think like we use peer dependency for very long, even before that. We NPM, like older NPM, have weirder behavior around peer dependency.
Sorry, everybody, I have a family emergency.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah. I will continue, and maybe Jakub can watch it in YouTube. Oh, maybe you listen at the same time. So Lee basically added it because we had a bunch of issues with weird errors, saying, and like solution for them was remove node models and do npm install. So the entire message was added because it was like a very popular issue people had.
Oh, I think Yakov got disconnected.
Yeah, I think we can wait for some time for him to join, especially like since second agenda items from him. I'm like, do you have any proposal on like this instance of like, I know we discussed it a bunch of time, and it's like,
I think there are a couple issues with instance objects. One is like, well, first question is why are we checking instance of? Is like a whole debate we can have, right? And then keeping ESM and CJS support aside, which is like potentially in getting rid of instance object, you can get it to work. The other problem is like, let's say I am using GraphQL.js in my server, but then I'm also using CodeGen. And then what could happen potentially is like, you have like lower version of GraphQL.js in your server, but GraphQL CodeGen is on like the latest version. And then now you're in this problem of like it's conflicting versions in your dependency trees. And then you have this weird error of like, you need GraphQL.js to be one version, which is like, I see that happen like almost every like few weeks later, I would see this one of these things pop up. And then the only way to fix this is like in Yarn, I just force Yarn resolution to point it towards version. But that's not like a good fix because like NPM doesn't support it, but on npm I can do it. So it's like keeping like, bundling on the side and like why runtime check. It's more like, why is it being enforced on like a code layer, right? Like,
yeah, I can explain. It's like actually a very good point. So what happened before Lee added instance of check? It was the same mess. Package was declared as peer dependency, but people was adding like
because even using peer dependency isn't the like best way. Like we have seen that, and it's like it doesn't really work at all. Because like I see that people opening issues on our repos every like couple of weeks later, you'll see some person bumping into this.
Yeah, this is exactly like issue was always the same. Issue was like if you never pass values between GraphQL.js instances, nothing bad will happen. If GraphQL.js just use GraphQL.js as internal dependency and output just generated code, nothing like theoretically should happen if your node models folder is not screwed. And we all know NPM is not ideal and Yard not ideal. So instance of triggers only if you pass objects created by one version of GraphQL.js into another version of GraphQL.js. This problem was before Lee added instance of custom instance of check. So instance of check, like if you have one copy of a class and another copy of a class, even if the name is the same, but they physically in different files, instance of will say false. So we had this problem before with custom instance of check, like it's because instance of works like that. Even if we figure out, even if we match like Warren PR currently, like is it implemented currently, it will solve some of the problem, but it doesn't solve others. For example, I added a new method to GraphQL schema, and I use this new method in execute. It happened like recently, like I think a month ago, I added a new method to schema, and I used it in execute. It's mean like older schema, if you pass it to execute, it doesn't have this method, so it will be a runtime crash. So theoretically, we can say we support like all previous GraphQL.js versions. So if you create schema with like really old GraphQL.js version and you pass it to execute, it will work. But it really means we cannot use anything we add into GraphQL schema. And I use GraphQL schema as an example. We have a bunch of types, errors, for example. Like we change, we change errors to like a new property to an error, required property. So if error is created by current version of GraphQL.js, this property is present, we know it's required, TypeScript is fine, everything works. But older version of GraphQL.js, like extensions. For example, right now, every error have extensions. And extension is object. It's always exists, it's required, it's very cool. You don't need to do optional chaining. Every error have extensions. So what if you use older version of GraphQL.js and GraphQL error is coming from that old version? It doesn't have extensions. So and your code is type checked against like newer version that have extension as like required field. It's mean like you will have runtime crash when you try to check dot extension. It's like, I don't think any big and complex project allow you to use classes from one version into another version. I don't think it's unique to GraphQL.js per se.
I mean, what are the examples? Like, because React also has classes in it, but like we don't really get these.
Yeah, React is good example. React previously you could not use mixed like different React version. React is also peer dependency, and previously before version 18, you could not mix React versions. I think version 18, like last version. Or one before.
Yeah, you can't mix versions with React, but like let's say I have like a package like React 16.5 in my tree, and then I'm installing like some dependency which is like 16 dot something. Like it does not really matter which 16 I am on, they would work fine. I don't get any errors. I've even seen things work like, I mean, I would be wrong, but I think some packages do work. Like I've seen some packages do React star. Like they don't even care about like peer dependency of what React version, but any React version would just work.
Yeah, so React, in a sense, like two things. Like React before, like it was a pretty big feature for them to support like different React versions. I never tried different subversion, so like not a major version, but subversion. I never tried to mix them, but React always was a peer dependency in all libraries I used. So I'm not sure if it was possible to mix like subversions. And if it was possible to use different copies. I know that is possible right now. So right now it's possible because they design API in such way to make it possible.
Yeah, but like I think React use case is different in that case, right? Like React is trying to help people migrate to like React Suspense or something on like very old versions of React. Like let's take GraphQL as example. GraphQL is an old React project. If GraphQL was running on React 12, but then they wanted a new part of the editor just to use React 18 because of suspense features, and no one actually wanted to migrate legacy GraphQL. Like I guess in that case for React it makes sense to invest time, but for us, is it really worth the effort? Like,
yeah,
does it really make sense? Like you wouldn't be like React does not have a spec. We do have a spec to follow. So like you can't be saying like I'm gonna run on React GraphQL 15, but then as GraphQL 17 comes out, you're basically spec non-compliant because in 17, let's say client control nullability is a spec feature, right? Like
yeah,
you're basically it's non-spec compliant server. So we don't even want to encourage people using old versions. We want people like easier paths to migrate to new versions. But then for us, the problem is like I could be on 16.5 and in some dependency tree, something is on 16.4, which would throw an error for me, which I don't think really should cause too big of a problem for someone.
yeah. So but let's get into practice. So imagine somebody adds a new method to schema class, and it get backported to 16x6. It's obvious if person needs something, he adds it and ask, can I backport? And we probably say yes because it's new functionality. So usually when, like, for example, like schema coordinate, it's a good example. Schema coordinates add schema to every type and field and argument and something. It's a schema coordinate, and we have like chain of PRs to edit, and they add like schema coordinate to every object, but they also change validation code and some other code to actually use with schema coordinate in the error messages. So basically, when we merge with PRs, like it's big stack of PR, and it's kind of really don't have time to maintain it or something. Jakub wanted to adopt it, by the way. So like if we merge them, it's mean like every argument, field, and type receive a schema coordinate, and we have a code that use that. And it's a new feature, so we don't need a break-in release for it. So it's got like, and somebody has to backport it currently, or we release it after 17 version. So it gets backported and released as 16.8, for example. So what happened and that after that? So if you use schema from 16.7 before this change, nothing have like schema coordinate attached. Arguments, fields, types, nothing have like schema coordinate. But the code inside validation expect things to have like schema coordinate. So
I see.
So problem here, yeah, we can, if we do a little bit of dancing around the tree for backporting things, so we can say if person want to backport schema coordinates, we can say like it's okay to add fields, it's not okay to backport like validation code that use them. We can say that, but it's create a bunch of issues. Like,
because you're adding a new feature, right, to an old version. But then the question is like, why did GraphQL.js go with the breaking release other than it's like core cleanups of dropping support for Node or something, right? What could be like a realistic reason for us to like go a breaking release?
Yeah, so it depends on,
like, let's say spec cut two things. Like schema coordinates is something I can add to like 15, 16 would be fine. No one will actually complain much. But then defer and stream is also a new spec feature. Let's say that gets approved. But then even if you're trying to backport it, you're basically non-compliant GraphQL server, right? Because you're not supporting defer and stream at that stage.
Like one thing, spec don't have breaking versions.
It's all incremental.
It's incremental. So stream and defer added as server may support stream and defer. So stream and defer is optional. It say like if stream and defer, if server supports stream and defer, it's mean like it should behave like that. But spec is developed in non-breaking way. It means like older GraphQL servers will remain spec compliant. Like we have certain guarantees. You can treat everything as breaking change, but for a spec is what we mean by non-breaking thing for a spec is that if from client side, we can change implementation, we can change like other things, but if it worked previously for clients, it will continue to work for them and remain spec compliant. So older servers need to remain spec compliant. So stream defer say it's if server may support stream defer, not should or required. So
Okay.
yeah, but
stream defer is not a good example here.
Yeah.
That okay.
In spec will never add stream and defer breaking for another reason. Execute right now. Execute return you either result or promise of result. Stream defer is breaking for GraphQL.js. It's not breaking for spec, but it's breaking for GraphQL.js because after we implement it, execute will start returning, I think, either result or promise of result or async iteratable or promise of async iteratable. No, like result, promise of result, and I think like I'm not sure, probably yeah, promise of async iteratable. So at least like free new like return type. And it's breaking change. If something previously returned like number or string, if now it will also return array, it's a breaking change, right? Because you didn't expect that to happen. So even on TypeScript thing, when you use execute and like you wrap it in some function, and this function have a return type, obviously they're not much anymore because there is like one additional possibility. So something can be non-breaking for spec, but breaking for GraphQL.js at the same time. But some spec changes are not breaking. For example, one-off is non-breaking. Schema coordinate is not breaking. By the way, like one of another example of problematic thing. One of add like a new flag to every input type, being like true or false. And when we work with schema, we expect this property to be present. But if schema created by older version, it's breaking. It's mean like our code expect this property to exist, but it's not exist. So instead of true or false, we receive undefined. It's like what I'm trying to say. It's like hard to add new features without like there is like producer side and consumer side of GraphQL.js. Like not every library have this. Some libraries just provide you single function and you pass input and receive output, nothing is bad. But on GraphQL, you can create a schema and pass it to some function. So it means there is a loop outside of GraphQL.js itself, loop in third-party code. So like CodeGen, for example, creates schema and pass it into validate. So this loop creates a problem because it means you can create like schema with one library using one version of GraphQL.js and pass it to execute to some another library. Like for example, there is like typed GraphQL, which is a library to create schema, and there is GraphQL tools, which is library to do like schema stitching. And what if like type GraphQL, not even what if, like in reality, on previous release, it was situation when GraphQL tools was on a newer version of GraphQL.js, supported newer version, and typed GraphQL was behind, supporting one version back only. So without peer dependency and without like this check, we're in situations that type GraphQL create a schema with one version of GraphQL.js. You get the schema and you plug it into GraphQL tools to run schema stitching, and GraphQL tools depend on a newer version of GraphQL.js. So the schema get passed to execute, and execute want like schema coordinate to be present there, or one of to be present there, or like schema methods that I added a month ago to be present there, and it's create a problem. So GraphQL, because we have these loops,
Yeah.
it's like our API is huge. Like I think our API is bigger than React in a sense. Last time I checked, we have like 400 functions, public one, classes and functions. We have like couple dozen classes and hundreds of functions. So it creates a mess, and especially since there is like a really strong ecosystem of things built around, like bunch of wrappers. Like you can create schema with like GraphQL Next type GraphQL.
There's so many.
Yeah, it's
well, do we even like, because what I understand, what we are coming into is like the GraphQL.js version actually doesn't really matter. It's more like the spec cut version matters. Like, what if we started to have like some sort of mechanism of like, this is the 2018 spec cut, and the schema built by this thing follows the 2018 spec cut. Like instead of saying GraphQL 16, or because essentially in a world, let's say 16.8 becomes schema coordinates, and then we have 17 with the deference stream, which also has schema coordinates. In theory, the schemas I generated with both of them would be the same, but the executed is different, right? Or the validation is also same, because well, you kind of just, I mean, okay, well, maybe not the deference stream parts of it, but then if I'm not including deference stream, everything would be the same on two different breaking versions of GraphQL.js.
Okay, let's
right.
There is like a couple of things. Stuff in like first we need to experiment before spec release. This is like idea of spec process. We merge stuff, people use it in production before we add stuff to a spec. It's like, because we can break GraphQL.js, we cannot break spec.
I mean, you could still have like a, I mean,
but it's technical. Let's focus on other point. It's just like in the reference. It's like it's deserves its own separate discussion, but it's even outside of this group. It's how we decide to develop spec itself. Back to what's in scope of this group. There is internal things. For example, schema coordinates and validation. So in validation, you have literal with error message. And this PR add schema coordinates, and he also do like a type dot schema coordinate to get schema coordinate for this type and put it in error message in literal. So if we receive a schema, this type that missing schema coordinate, this like actual JavaScript code will be broken. It's not related. Like for example, it's harder to find, but I can send you a link afterwards.
Okay.
I added like even non-spec changes. I added like a new method in the schema and I use that method inside execute to resolve fields. So I added to schema. So every schema created by this version of GraphQL.js and all future version will include this method, right? And execute, in execute, I use that method. So it's also compatible. But if I go one version before I add it into a schema and generate schema there, that instance of a schema don't have this method. So if I pass to execute, execute will say basically like JavaScript will say will crash because it will say this object don't have method get field definition.
Yeah, but if you think about it, but it may not be exactly like let's say I generate schema with Nexus, right? And I'm trying to use CodeGen, and they both are running different versions of GraphQL. But spec-wise, the features in my schema are the same features.
Yeah.
I don't care if there's type info in V6, V17 or not. In that case, it's more like internals of like GraphQL CodeGen.
Yeah.
Would matter, but like let's say GraphQL CodeGen is on V17 and Nexus is on V16.
Okay.
But the schema generated from Nexus is like spec compliant, like nothing is wrong. And then like ideally you shouldn't be like to my understanding, you really shouldn't be just passing the schema object. You should be parsing your own schema in that case and building a new schema object.
Yeah, so like we can do we can do that in theory. We can do that with SDL, for example. We can pass SDL as a string between different versions and it will work. But you cannot attach resolvers to SDL. I can give you like concrete example. Give me a second because like I think with so so give me a second to find PR that added this method. Yeah. So last month I added PR with PR. Yeah, and over there I added this method to a schema. I will send you. Oh, I can share my screen actually. Maybe it will be faster, right? So you see my screen, right? Sakaj?
Yes, I do see your screen.
Yeah. So in this change, it happened like last month. I added a new method getField to a schema object. It's not required by spec. It's not just implementation detail. And I use this method in execute and subscribe, basically like to remove code duplication. We had like this function, the same function code here and inside execute, and I just like move it to a schema. So here in line 480, now we have like a schema.getField, right? So if schema object created by GraphQL version before this change, schema object don't have getField method. JavaScript will crash and say like, There is no get field.
Yeah. Okay. I mean,
Yeah. So we can basically say, like, I can never use new methods. GraphQL.js cannot use new methods that we add into schema, but it also bad, like we add new APIs, but we cannot use them ourselves, which is like weird in a sense. And we cannot ever use that version, that method. And
I mean, it's more, well, I guess we can take this couple of ways. Like maybe like adding a new function to the class may not be the best thing to do or something, right?
yeah, but we need to add, sometimes we need to add it for like performance reason. For example, I can show you. So in schema objects, it's not only like, in my case, I wanted to remove code duplication, but we, for example, have like with get possible types. You pass union or you pass interface. It's like we need it for execution. You pass interface and you get all possible types of that interface. It's like these functions save us a lot of computation. We have like other like similar, like here get implementations, for example. Yeah, it's wrapper. So in a sense, some of the functions will do caching or speed up things. We need to add them somewhere.
Okay.
So, and by adding it to a schema, they're also usable by third-party implementation. For example, like Yakov's executor can use that function. He don't need to duplicate it in his own implementation. So I'm like, either we, question is here, either we remove all internal detail, we'll freeze all internal details for forever, or we like basically we cannot like add or remove stuff from classes, which is like super problematic. For example, I remove like certain stuff from it's not even functions. Like, for example, yeah, I can try to find one off by Benji to explain you. And one off is obviously a spec feature, but yeah, I need to check, but I expect it to have yeah, definitions. And yeah, here you see it's like every type will have Boolean, and it's not optional. It's either true or false. So a code that use it expect true or false. It's not expect like true, false, or undefined. Code expect this property to be there. So probably we have like yeah, and there is like value from IST that, yeah, here is actually, yeah, undefined will work as like false in this particular case, but some other code can have like explicit check for true or false. I'm just saying, like, anything that add anything to those classes is problematic. Yeah. Hope I explain it to you and explain
Yeah.
why tied to a spec, because like one of tied to a spec, schema coordinate tied to a spec, but my PR for adding a method to a schema is not tied to a spec. This is like problem of supporting multiple version. We can do that, but it's like a big sacrifice. We freeze our API and we like migration process, deprecation process is like basically impossible. We cannot remove stuff. It becoming like very complicated, I would say. So
Okay.
yeah, it's complex issue. And before it's 1 hour and Yakov is not connected back. He said he had family emergencies, so we need to close. Last point I wanted to explain you, and especially since I promised to explain that, and now we have like a video, so I can reference people to this video. So we have this problem always with instance of things that Lee added. It's just a way to make user-friendly error. So without instance of check, user creates schema by one version of GraphQL.js, pass it to another version of GraphQL.js to do execute. Inside execute, we call schema.getFieldDefinition. And without instance of check, user will just have a crash saying object don't have getFieldDefinition method, which is bad user experience, and user will open issue on our repo and it will be hard to investigate, and like it's a whole mess. What Lee added is explicit check. It's mean before execute, start executing. Before we try to call this method, first thing we do with the schema is to check if it's schema. And if it's schema but created by another version, we get user-friendly error saying your schema is not compatible, created by different version, and it's not compatible with this version. So instance of custom instance of that Lee added, it didn't create a problem. It just added beforehand check. Before like runtime crash, we actually check it and produce user-friendly error. So here is explanation that basically like instance of mechanism is not the root cause. It's like explicit check instead of crash.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else before we close? And about Yakov discussion topic with Yakov, I think we can discuss it asynchronously.
Yeah, we can discuss next working group or something.
Yeah, and they both pretty technical. I think like I explained my position about Warren PR and what's deal breaker and what's not. And about visitor, it's pretty technical issue. I wrote a comment and I wait until like Yakov will answer it. Yeah. Anything else to discuss before we like finish this one?
No, we're good. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. And
Bye.
thanks for listening. It was quite good that we now all on one level and we can like discuss like how to deal with this issue, because it's multi-year one issue. So yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.